one and all. Welcome back to Cafe Penumbra, your cyber cafe where we exchange ideas about current events, hot topics, storytelling, plus all the things. Please do visit us and interact on our sister platform, the Cafe Penumbra Discord server. See the link in the show notes or at seraphimpenumbra.com. In today's discussion, we're joined by Carlo Quispe, a Peruvian queer cartoonist based in New York City. Carlo is the creator of Supermanuel, Hairy Tales, and Uranus Comics. Carlo and I met in New York in the early aughts and collaborated together on numerous events and installations, including collaborations with Never Never Party Collective, Le Petit Versailles, Dance Tube, Mix NYC, and we both worked together as production assistants for Voluptuous Horror of Karen Black. Carlo's work is available for purchase at carloquispe.com. That's CARLOQUISPE. And of course, we will post a link in the show notes. Carlo, welcome to Cafe Penumbra. Thank you very much for being here and taking the time to have a conversation. How are you today?
I'm okay. Thanks for having me. It's nice to recall the Never Never Party. I feel like anytime any of us get together, I feel like we're keeping that party going, you know?
I do. It's interesting. We could have another whole conversation about just that. But yeah, it's been neat to kind of like reconnect with some of the people from the past and see where we've gone. And of course, you know, part of what we're going to talk about is social media. So it's also been a new kind of component for people in our generation to be able to keep track on people through social media. But that's for another time. One of the things that I've always really admired about you and low-key like bragged on when talking about you with other people as an artist and as a person is that you're so prolific. And I find as an artist myself that when life happens, it's very easy to lose connection with flow. Like you get into a rhythm in your process, like that experience when you just lose track of time and almost nothing else really exists in that moment, that really critical flow. And I feel like for myself, when life disruptions were distracting that, then my flow wasn't happening and I wasn't creating. But every time that I looked over, you know, stay in your lane. But every time I looked at what you were doing, like despite the fact that the world has literally been crumbling around us for decades, you still managed to find a quiet corner to create. Like you're going to draw something or sketch something or come up with a new idea or hatch a plan. And that's really admirable. So that's one of the things that I always say about you when I talk about your work as an artist. So would you be able to talk a little bit about your process or how it is that you always manage to create despite all the outside interference and distractions?
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm really flattered. You know, I'm just very touched by what you've said. I mean, I just, can't believe that anyone's paying any attention at all. So, really happy to hear that. It sounds so sweet, and I thank you so much. And likewise, I see that you're also like going into like virtual reality stuff and like 3D modeling stuff. I think that's really cool, and I think that's really interesting how you are wanting to, I don't know, really get educate yourself through that process. And I think that's what's admirable. I feel like the stuff that I'm making, I'm doing it because I've got some deadline, right? I've got like a deadline that I set up, whether it's the New York Queer Zine Fair, for example, that's happening on Saturday, October 7th from 11 to 5 at the LGBTQ Center in Manhattan, for example. Yeah, see, like there's something that I have to look forward to, right? And so I know that I have to have stuff for that, something that will, likely sell there, right? So you'll probably notice that I'll be busier in the fall, like after the summer. And that's because a lot of the book fairs that I like take place in this time where everyone's like picking presents for the holidays, for the end of the year. So, if you think about it kind of like a little farmer, you're like cultivating, and like, developing stuff that later you're going to then like spend some time selling. Cause like I love to participate, in publications that are set up with like publishers and, they have wider distribution, and that's really great. I love all that. But I also do my own work to publish my own comics. And so that's also why I may seem busy. It's because I have to also print my own comics. And I guess I'm doing it in print just because to me it's just been the way that I've monetized my work. I know that there's people who are able to digitize their stuff and you can get it digitally. There are some comics that I have made that have reached like ebook level. I really have to like learn how to monetize my stuff digitally. So anyway, that's just like a long way of saying that's why I do print. And it's also been kind of difficult to navigate this way of making money during the pandemic because we couldn't get together in person. And so I just had to dedicate more time to publicizing my website and having stuff on the store that people would be able to afford and also afford the shipping. That's why the stuff in my website is stuff that's in print because the shipping is cheaper for media mail. When I sell a T-shirt, I don't do it through the website. I do it with some other payment method because people have to not only pay for the shirt but then they have to pay for the shipping, which is usually like $10 or something, which then sometimes makes, depends on the item, but sometimes it doesn't make it even worth it to have it, for sale on the website. It only makes sense to have it for sale in person in book fairs or something. Like, for example, I'm making a miniature called The Creature from Uranus, which is like this queer alien that eats delicious rich people. So I just figured out that rich people are just better fed. And so they're probably more delicious to invading aliens. And so I've got this little miniature that I made, but it's too expensive to ship considering its price. So it only makes sense to really sell it in person. So, I mean, at least maybe it'll be an incentive for people to come out to the Gay and Lesbian Center on Saturday, October 7th, from 11 to 5. I don't know. I hope so.
I hope so too. Do you find that people are coming out in droves now that it seems like most of the pandemic restrictions are lifted, or what's that climate like in New York?
A lot of book fairs enforce like the mask mandate still. For example, when I went to FlameCon this summer, which was amazing, they enforced the mask mandate, and they also asked people to show proof that they were vaccinated. And I thought, you know, people were done that I thought book fairs were done asking people to mask up, but FlameCon really stuck to even though it was a personal friend who couldn't get in. I feel kind of bad about it, but at the same time, I do appreciate that they enforce the mandate because then you really don't have to have that kind of anxiety um, like in other book fairs where you have a mask on, but then no one else does. And so yeah, I appreciate FlameCon for that. So yeah, I guess it's kind of like wearing a condom, or like taking prep. Like you have to educate yourself the risk that's out there, and then you kind of like measure that risk for yourself,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And do what is good for you. You know.
Absolutely. Part of what you said was that part of what, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but part of what acts as a motivator or why the perception is that you're always busy is that you always have these deadlines you need to prepare for so that you can eat, pay rent, or whatever. So I can certainly appreciate that. But I wanted to dig a little bit more into the kind of juxtaposition of being analog in the digital marketplace. I also have an online store, and I think I'm a little bit jealous because I don't do my own fulfillment. And I'm finding that there's so many people attached to a product. Like you said, like I did try to offer free shipping. So if you order a thing, you're not like tacking onto that. But of course, I'm paying for that. It's not actually free. But then, the distributor gets a piece of the pie, and then the web host for the store gets a piece of the pie, and then the platform gets the piece of the pie, and then my website gets the piece of the pie. And I'm like, this messaging to have like an online marketplace doesn't really come with all the information I think that you could make an informed decision. So at the end of the day, I'm like, I'm making a lot more money for a lot of other people other than myself. And most of what I do as an artist isn't like there isn't really a product that you can sell in particular. But what I think more interesting is that you can buy an analog, like a comic that you made by hand and then put into an envelope. And, like it's just so much more personal. So, like, sure, you can get digital downloads and you can have exclusively digital products. But I think, especially when we look at the work itself, which you have like a lot of different styles, but at the same time, whenever I see your work, I'm like, yeah, I know who made that. Some of it, and I know it's probably an insult to like compare, but some of it has a very distinctly like Keith Haring like presence to it, and then some of it is you just can't compare to anybody, which is probably a good thing. As I don't know if people who are listening are going to have a reference for this, but it has a very zine quality. Like in when I was going through high school, um, it was very kind of low key underground, like fanzines, like whatever it is that you wanted to talk about, these like newsletter kinds of things that I kind of thought were like way more interesting than going to a store and buying a magazine that was like selling stuff, So it had this very renegade underground quality to it. And the fact that you brought that into the current narrative, or you haven't brought it, like it's just stayed with you, and here we are. So I commend you for that, because I think that it makes your, the work itself has its own value, but then I think the way that you're creating it and distributing it to its audience also is like really reflective of who you are as an artist. So I also wanted to go back. We were talking a little bit earlier about when you were creating Super Manuel, which is one of the comics that you have for sale on your website. And you reflected on how you like intentionally utilized a specific style to like achieve a resonance with your audience. And it kind of did very well in terms of how it was received by the audience. Can you talk a little bit more about how you developed that?
Yeah. Again, thank you so much for, your kind words about my work. And,
Yeah.
I think that it's an honor to be compared, with Keith Haring. And, I feel like my comics are definitely influenced by Keith Haring. I love the way that he, you know, uh, used cartoon language in his artwork. He's always referencing comics in some way. Um, you know, it's interesting how, like, you're saying that, the magazine, like the zine, was more interesting than like other magazines, like commercial magazines. But that just, that kind of like made me think about how in my own in my own process, I'm very influenced by commercial art, and I will take some things from commercial art into my work in a kind of way that Keith Haring did. Like I was just saying, he took comic book language and used it in his artwork. I also like to reference commercial art in my work, not just because, like you say, it's like a way to also like refer to yourself in an autobiographical way, because I come from a commercial art background, but I also enjoy things like comics from different eras. Like Super Manuel, for example, when I did that comic, I was trying to fulfill different agendas at the same time with just one comic. So at the time, I was making the comic for a magazine that's called World War III Illustrated. And the title for that, the theme for that issue was Fight Fascism. This was the 2016 issue. And the editor is Seth Bachman. And it was World War III Illustrated is a political comics magazine that's been going on since the 80s, that was started by Seth Bachman and Peter Cooper. Peter Cooper is a cartoonist that works in Mad Magazine right now. And so, and they both graduated from SVA, just like in the 80s, just like Keith Haring.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And also they've had like artists like David Vonorovich in their comic. And I'm, honored to be a part of this comic, right? And so I'm making my submission, which is like Super Manuel, and I'm, kind of taking this non-serious look, at the enemy, who has been nominated to be the conservative nominee, right, for president. And so there was like this narrative that he was saying, against Mexicans and against immigrants in general, right? And he wants to put in the Muslim ban, etc. Right? All of these terrible things about making people wanting to make people afraid of immigrants and incite his already xenophobic base, right? And so it reminded me, I guess, of when the U.S. wanted to get when there was propaganda back during World War II, that would be that was created to get people to support U.S. involvement in World War II, right?
Right.
And one of the images that I remember from that time of propaganda, is a drawing of Captain America #1, I think, is has a cover of Captain America punching Hitler, right? And so I redrew that composition with my character. Instead of Captain America, it was Super Manuel, and instead of Hitler, it was the Republican nominee, right? And so it was kind of like updating the scenario, and also there's like a Nazi agent shooting at Captain America in the original drawing. At the same time, he's punching Hitler, right? And so in my comic, it was, instead of a Nazi, it's an ICE agent that's shooting at Super Manuel, right? And instead of shield of the American flag, the bullet bounces off of his butt, right? So it's still making like cheeky joke, It's still about like his body, it's still like a physical humor kind of joke, but it's also like pointing out, how the ICE agent is an equivalent to the Nazi soldier. And so the reason why I wanted to do that was because I wanted to connect the situation we're going through now and the kind of character that I was making. I wanted to connect that to World War II, when we were literally fighting Nazis, right?
Right.
And not just to make comic book reference, like a visual reference, but also to connect with the older generations that grew up with Superman and with Captain America as like, heroes, right? And I wanted to kind of connect my character, Super Manuel, that even though there's this anti-immigrant narrative, here is a character that actually is heroic and is here to save the day, not to fuck it up, And in the comic, you can see that the style of the comic is from when Superman first came out, like back almost 100 years ago. Superman was not so much like a soldier that represented U.S. Nuclear superiority yet. When Superman first came out, his enemy is poverty, really, because he's like fighting villains like Lex Luthor, who are like slumlords, right? And so again, there's another connection to the situation that we have going on when the Republican nominee is actually a greedy, terrible landlord as well, right? So that's also why I thought that connection with the original Superman worked, because when Superman first came out, he was like literally a social justice warrior, who would like fight for the little guy and for like the powerless. And now he's more like a super soldier, like a nuclear weapon. But when he first started out, he was very much about like defending people from bullies, right? That's what he was really meant to do. So yeah, so I kind of like that original conception of Superman, and Super Manuel is more like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, more like the original conception of Superman. Anyway, I could go on forever about it. Oh yeah, and one more thing. So it wasn't just to connect with the older generation. It's also, I had to make a comic that was also like all ages, because at the time I was teaching a class, like a comic book class,
Right.
to teenagers, and so I needed to make a comic for them that was all ages so that they could read it. So that's also why Super Manuel is kind of like a different kind of comic, because I usually make like adult work. And so this was kind of like, you know, I mean, this was also back to in 2016, almost 10 years ago. So I have been making all ages work since then. Also it's, sometimes required because there's like more censorship depending on the
Right.
events or like the publication that I want to take part of. And so, sometimes I have to be like Mr. Fantastic, from like the Fantastic Four, and I have to bend myself
Yeah.
in many different shapes to fit into, a situation that I want to participate in, right? So I have to be flexible so that I can like, have something to say, whether it's for an all ages audience or for an adults only audience, right?
Wow. Do there's a lot to unpack. So first, I would want to say that I
Yeah.
think I think I mean I looked at that comic certainly in researching and felt like I get it. But then to hear you explain it, it just blows my mind how layered and complex something that most people would perceive as just, line art scribbled on a piece of paper. Not that I'm saying that about your work, but has such political commentary.
Yeah. 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 No, but it does have like that levels. It has like levels of like superficiality. But then like if you know more about like comics
Right.
history, like if you know about Jack Kirby drawing that cover, of Captain America, if you already know about it, then you will make that connection. But then if you don't know, it'll still have like a cool dynamic, quality. But yeah, I am trying to, try to understand. I understand that not everybody will be able to understand every single thing about it, depending on their
Right.
familiarity with not just comics, but also like political subjects. Because some people really out there are just clueless. So I have to also work with them, and kind of like, if they don't know anything about the subject, then here is my take on it, you know?
Right. I feel like you, with that particular project, not to like pick one out or whatever. I just remember when we were talking about it, I was particularly interested. But I feel like what you've hit on here is that you've created a work that's intended for all ages and specifically built in a reference that's directed at the boomer generation, right? But then also you used exactly the same comic and the
Yeah.
same material and the same message to teach a class to young people. And I feel like, okay, so you have a breadth of, a demographic there that you're reaching with the same all ages content, right? But you're also kind of like I don't want to say that you're like planting seeds, but like you're having an interaction and a dialogue with a generation of people who may most likely wouldn't have made all those referential connections, but now like are I don't think it's a huge leap in 2023 to make a connection between ICE and Nazis, but like this idea of history repeating itself and the fact that you're working with kids and like I feel like this, just the art element kind of like creates a conversation where they're like participating. And a couple of months ago, I got to participate on a panel where, well, one of the other panelists was an educator and had like this really brilliant perspective on the younger generation that I mean, my work generally isn't for all ages and certainly not for younger people. So I don't have a huge interaction with that demographic. But I remember when all the anti-alphabet legislation was in the news, and it still is. But we did a podcast on that was the first podcast actually, and reading accounts of how like school children, like we're talking third grade and fourth grade, actually rallied together and organized walkouts. And so the message that this other panelist was giving was that like the young people are motivated and inspired and absolutely ready to like connect with actualizing progress and change. So that was just really exciting. And I feel like anytime you're going to be able to take your work that's so intersectional into a younger
Yeah.
generation,
Yeah.
like that's a win.
Yeah. I feel energized by working with younger people and honored to to be
Mm,
trusted, working with younger people. And I feel like they're honest, and they, they want to they want to know
Yeah.
everything. They want to know everything about everything. And so you better be ready to answer those questions, you know, and also be ready to say, I'll find out for you.
Right.
Um, I'll work on that with you. If I don't know really, right? Um, you know, it's yeah, it's interesting, being in this also like educator role. It makes me think about all the other educators that I depended on when I was young, and like the educators that I depend on now, right?
For sure.
To, get more knowledge into this, thick
Mm,
head, right? I need people who are experts, to be able to help me figure stuff out. Yeah. And also I need, my the influence of my friends, and
100%.
their political views, and their passion, that is also like an influence, like, I've always been fascinated by your work, and how you've been able to, create, your persona, and how you were able to perform on stage. I really, have always been a Seraphim Bipinambra groupie. So I've always, enjoyed how you you do your art as well. And I've also been like, influenced by it as well, you know.
Well, thank you. I feel it's an interesting point because I find that I don't know if it's at a different phase of my life, but I did forget what it was in reference to, but I was having a moment of realizing, you know what it is I'm getting calls and inquiries for bookings and mostly turning them down because for me, when I'm actively booking shows, it's because I have a show that I'm trying to sell. And I've been, as you know, I've been a student for almost 3 years now. I'm almost finished. So I just haven't made time to like create any new work, but I have in terms of stage work. But I've just noticed that I'm curating more and like the work that I do is way less informed by an interest in entertaining. Well, not to say that it's a bad thing. It was an interesting observation because I remember a time when I was in New York, when I was out dressed in heels and a corset 6 days a week. And now, like, I love all that. I love to paint and do all that. I do just find that I get more gratification out of other kinds of creative outlets. So it's just interesting. A lot of people are asking if I'm coming back to the stage, and I'm like, I didn't quit or retire. I'm just busy doing other things.
Yeah. Well, you also back in a way when you're doing your monologues. Do you feel like that brings you back into people's, radar?
To an extent, I think because a lot of the people that have known me for a long time know that I haven't been super active. And so the content that I'm sharing is different experience for them. And I'm also finding just like I'm getting new people who are interested who don't have any idea what it is that I do or what I've done. So I find that like the little short videos and things are
Yeah.
like just a way of like connecting to an old audience to say that I'm still here and to new audiences just just to have them join the conversation. It's been fun and it's definitely been a creative outlet.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I think I'm crazy because of adding the amount of stuff that I take on. Sometimes feels a little bit overwhelming, but I honestly wouldn't have it any other way. I do feel overall just like lucky that most of what I get to focus on is some creative project or endeavor or other. So yeah, I mean, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I think at this point when we've been around as long as we have, like you start to see things change, and a little bit. That's kind of leading into my next question. We talked a little bit about how, as an artist of any kind, trying to carve out a space for yourself involves a very high degree of marketing.
Mm.
I remember being in art school back in the early '90s, just out of high school, and there was no, the program itself was focused on honing your skill, like improving the relationship between your eye and your hand or whatever medium it was that you were working with. But there was no mention of marketing or branding. Like, I don't think the word branding like came to public awareness at that point yet. But there was no education about like, okay, once you improve yourself as an artist, which is kind of silly because you're always improving yourself as an artist, but like just no mention of how to make money, right? Like, and so the program that I'm in now is kind of the polar opposite of that, where they have a lot of the focus is on how to get a job and what kinds of skills you need to collect to go after them, and a lot more of it is focused on branding and making sure that you have an internet presence, which is very different. It does seem that some forms of art lend themselves more readily to digital marketing, but one of the things that distinguishes your work is that it's very organic, it's handmade, and in some cases it has a very almost vintage zine quality to it, like I mentioned before, which I love. I'm wondering how you feel about being an artist and dividing your time between creating and selling. And how do you think social media has impacted this?
Yeah, okay. Well, I feel definitely, well, I guess even back when I got out of school in the year 2000, uh, that's when animation, like 3D animation,
Mhm.
was first coming out. And suddenly everything that I had learned for the last 4 years was just completely irrelevant. And like, it was all about, and I guess I'm just talking about in general terms, you know, like, I mean, you, it's just like, I was trained, in like studio arts, and suddenly everything became digital, right? And so it was
Right.
up to you, to just pick up this new tool. It's similar in a way to now what's going on with like AI tools, right? And
Mhm.
they just had the writer strike because they want to make sure that they don't get replaced by AI, right? And so
Yeah.
they want to make sure that it stays in its place as like a tool, and then the person who actually gets paid is the writer, right? Like the creator, right? And so and there's even more technology to get into, because there's like not just 3D imaging, but there's also virtual reality, right? Which is like so much fun. And like my favorite virtual reality game is Pokemon Go, and I play every day. And
Really?
I will play with my digital, virtual reality pet. And so, I'm trying to get into it, like in my, 45-year-old brain, as much as I can get into it, right? And like thinking of ideas like how could I, create in this with this new tool, right? Like I also want to learn, all the new tricks and everything. Um, so to anyone listening out there, who wants to, catch up, do, what Seraphim is doing, and go to school, update your education. I think that, it's so cool that you're doing that. And, you already have had like your message, you already have your, your concept. And so that's what's important, because there's going to be always new technology. There's going to be always something new to learn, but I think what's important is that you remember your story, and, what the message of your story is, because then you can like liberate it from, it's like physical reality, right? And take it somewhere else, like for example, when I did my Harry Tales mini comic, and then it was eventually turned into an animated short, thanks to Pablo Oliverio from Argentina, and that's someone who I met through Mix, right? And so to me, making that cartoon, it meant like I had a chance to honor not just like Aro Blackman and the ink tank and my commercial animation background, but also now I was also honoring Mix NYC and SKJ and Sarah Schulman and Act Up and all this other stuff where Mix comes from, right? Which is the only reason how I was able to meet Pablo, right, the director of the cartoon. And so that's what I was able to kind of bring two worlds that I live in, right? And two parts of my life I was able to bring together through making that cartoon, right? And it was, the message really was about loving your body hair. That's what Harry Tales is all about, right? That's what, like, my gay werewolf at the end, he still feels like a monster because he's so hairy, but he, at least he found someone who appreciated him for how he really is, right? Yeah, because like I had a friend, who was shaving his back hair for his boyfriend, and I was like, well, that's cool that you have the option, right, to shave or not shave. But I would prefer it, like, for me personally, like, if, like, nobody ever shaved. I like it natural. And so that's kind of like why I made Hairy Tales, right? And so yeah, I kind of just wanted to be kind of like celebratory of like body hair. But this is also like pre-bear, like I guess, like, at the same time, maybe. But like, the bear identity became popular eventually, and now it's like dominating, right? So I like to feel like I was like in the werewolf, appreciation, group, like, before all that. So yeah, that's what I think about, like, adapting, your work into animation, or like to other forms of, like,
Hmm.
entertainment, or art, I guess what I was trying to say, it was that, like, because we were talking about digital technology and like being like an analog, like, artist. But what I was saying was that, like, no matter what tool or technology you're using, it's really more about the message that you are bringing. It's more about, like, what the moral of your story is. And if you have that, uh, if you have already, you know figured that out, then you can take it in, and have, like, your art in any kind of way out there, whether it's digital or physical. What's important is, what you're saying with it.
Totally agree. Totally agree. So, if is there anything that you're working on now that you're able to share with us? Any projects coming up?
Yes, I have three projects coming up, that I'm working on at the same time, and they're all really different from each other too, which is what's more fun about it. And so the first one that I'm doing is a comic that is called Carlito in America, and it's like a second part to the comic that I did in 2019 called Carlito, which is about, like, what it was like, mm, to live in Spain and to, like, immigrate to New York in the early 90s. And the comic Calito in America is going to be a little different because it's more about what it's like to actually live here, what it was like to actually, I guess what I mean by here is what it was like to live in Long Island in the early 90s as a Peruvian kid in a mostly white suburban atmosphere, having to, like, adapt to the language, and also at the same time discovering my sexuality, and at the same time being, like, part of, like, the way that my parents divorced. So yeah, so that's one project. That's what the Carlito comic is about. It's kind of like coming of age comic, right? Then I'm doing a comic about the current Peruvian crisis that started last November when there was another presidential coup, and the president who tried to overthrow the Congress was sent to jail, even though he was doing what he thought people wanted him to do, because there's so much corruption going on, and he couldn't get his agenda through because of these obstructionists, Congress people. And so he was going to, have a brand new Congress, but then the Congress was like, no, you're not, and you're going to jail. And so they appointed the vice president, and then she started killing all the protesters. I mean, well, at least one protester per day, as you know, that's like what it averages out to. Like there was when the Congress sent the ex-president to jail, a lot of Peruvian people who supported him, started protesting, especially people from the regions outside of Lima. And so they were confronted by the military, and a lot of people were shot. People who, had no weapons, kids, right, who were protesting the crisis, the situation. And so, yeah, this didn't just happen in a bubble, in a void. The last comic that I made for World War III Illustrated that was about Peru had to do with the terrible president that we had in the 90s, Fujimori, who is still in jail, right? And so the comic that I did last ended with Fujimori's daughter wanting to run for president, right? And then also she went to jail because she was doing some, criminal stuff with the fundraising for her campaign or something like that. And so, since Fujimori, there have been like a lot of terrible presidents, including one that ended up committing suicide. There were some that like tried to escape the country and had to be brought back, and like others that are still like in jail for corruption. And so I kind of want to do like a rundown of them, and then we're going to end that comic with the young people who are protesting for like a more just and fair Peru. And yeah, a lot of those militant protesters are queer people in Peru, and they are visibly out and queer in the protest. And so that's like a very interesting development. And that's definitely different from before. Yeah. And then the other comic I'm going to do is a continuation of my adventure comic called Toxic City, which is kind of like a queer adventure, where I have like a team of queer kids surviving the post-apocalypse. And there's like different ways to survive this like future slash alternate reality where like there's like the independent survivors that are like in little groups, and then there's also like religious zombie cult, and there's also like paramilitary cannibal groups, right? And they like all want to recruit you and or eat you, right? And so my characters have to like defend themselves from these groups and survive at the same time. And one of my characters is psychic, or at least thinks that they're psychic. And I kind of want to deal with this like psychic situation, because even though in the first part like he's having these weird visions, I kind of want to make it so that the like environment in in my toxic city is actually sentient and is communicating with my character. And so, I kind of want to explain like where like a weird voice is coming from. But yeah, I kind of want to put like psychic ideas of psychic stuff in like a fantasy sci-fi situation, because yeah, I really think that you'd have to really question someone who thinks that they're like really psychic or something like that. I think that it makes more sense to believe in psychic things in a fantasy sci-fi situation, not in real life. And so, yeah, that's why I'm putting this psychic character in this like fantasy world, because at least in my personal opinion, right, I'm not trying to you know talk about anyone else but myself, but like I want to you know make this character psychic in this fantasy world. Yeah, that's why that story kind of exists in its own kind of alternate universe, because I do make comics about like the world we live in, but I also like to do stories about alternate realities. I guess that's what you'd call it now. A multiverse, right? Yeah. So those are the projects I'm juggling right now, and also there's like the New York Queer Zine Fair happening at the center on Saturday, October 7th from 11 to 5, and that's gonna be the the big event I'm looking forward to at the moment. After that, we'll probably try to organize more queer comics group readings. I'm thinking about places like Blue Stockings or other, like alternate spaces, um, for our events. Yeah, yeah. I hope that we're able to have it while you're in town or something. And thank you so much for making this time for us. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to be able to reconnect with you and uh, you know keep the party going, so to speak.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for that. I do appreciate it.
Thank you for asking, and thank you so much for spending time with me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks again. We're all looking forward to seeing your work and looking forward to speaking with you next time. Thank you for stopping by Cafe Penumbra. I'm your host, Seraphim Penumbra, wishing you a jolly new now. Today's show has not been sponsored. As always, let's keep the conversation alive, and remember it's only a conversation when ideas are exchanged. Please take advantage of our community platform Discord server. And if you're interested in a way to support this show, you can buy me a coffee or get yourself some retail therapy in our shop that is so fabulous it has 2 Ps. What you have just witnessed was recreated from actual events as they happened live for the very first time. Today's programming has been brought to you in part by the letter 7 and the number blue. Cafe Penumbra is produced by PLC Media Lab.